He thought he was a guest, but froze when he heard what the millionaire bride said. Caleb wasn't the type who liked weddings. It wasn't for lack of affection, but because that kind of party always had a way of making him feel a little out of place. But when the envelope arrived with a thick, perfumed paper, his name handwritten in careful script, he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. And it wasn't because the ceremony promised to be in one of the most beautiful ballrooms in Chicago. It was because of the note on the back of the card, 7 words written in blue ink: "I really need you to come. Brooke." The problem was simple. Caleb didn't know any Brooke. He turned the envelope over and over, checked the address. It was his all right. He asked his co-workers if anyone knew the Sterling family. The surname was printed on the invitation alongside gold crests. The co-workers raised their eyebrows. Everyone knew who the Sterling family was. Everyone except Caleb, apparently. For 3 days he kept that invitation on his living room table, went to sleep thinking about it, woke up thinking about it. On Thursday night, he called his mother. Miriam answered on the second ring, as she always did. Her voice was one of those voices you carry inside you forever, you know. Soft, a little husky, full of warmth in every syllable. "Mom, do you know someone named Brooke Sterling?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. A pause too short to be a coincidence, too long to be ignored. "Why are you asking, son?" He explained the invitation, explained the note. Waited. "Go, Caleb." Miriam's voice came out different at that moment, heavier. "Go to the wedding, and when you come back, we need to talk." He tried to ask more. She dodged the question, said she was tired, that she was going to bed early, and she hung up. Caleb sat in the dark of the living room for a long time after that. The following Saturday, he put on the only suit he owned, the navy blue one he wore for graduations and important meetings, and went. The ballroom where the wedding took place was one of those places that make you feel like you've stepped into a magazine photo. The walls were paneled in dark wood and gold trim. Crystal chandeliers hung from the very high ceiling, casting a warm, soft light over the entire space. White flower arrangements repeated across the tables, the columns, along the center aisle. There were hundreds of guests, men in jackets, women in long dresses, children dressed up with that slightly uncomfortable look of a kid who's been forced to wear nice clothes. Caleb found his seat on the list and sat in one of the middle rows. No one around him seemed to know him. He didn't know anyone. He felt that familiar thing of being in a place where everyone seems to belong, except you. When the music started and the doors opened, he looked up like everyone else, and then he saw the bride. She entered in a long-sleeved lace dress, with her veil pinned in her dark hair all swept up, with that posture of someone who's been taught since childhood to walk through ballrooms without looking sideways. But halfway down the aisle, her eyes swept across the rows of guests with an urgency that didn't match the rhythm of the music. It was as if she were looking for someone. Her eyes met Caleb's, and she stopped. For a fraction of a second, she actually stopped. The musician kept playing. The man beside her, an older gentleman with completely white hair and slightly hunched shoulders, gently pulled her arm. She started walking again. But that look stayed lodged in Caleb's chest like a hook. The ceremony was beautiful in the way expensive ceremonies usually are. The groom was tall, in a black suit and bow tie, with a smile that seemed rehearsed for that specific day. His name was Grant. Someone behind Caleb whispered to another person that Grant was the son of an important family from Milwaukee, that the union of the two was perfect, and the word was said with those invisible quotation marks that everyone understands. Caleb couldn't stop thinking about Miriam's pause on the phone. After the ceremony, when the guests scattered around the hall for the reception, he stayed near the drink table, holding a glass of juice he wasn't drinking. The old man with white hair, Brooke's father, who he would later learn was called Franklin, stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the garden with an expression that didn't match a festive day at all. He seemed like a man carrying a weight that no one else in the hall could see. Caleb was about to leave. He was going to put the glass on the table, grab his jacket, and slip out discreetly, as if he had never been there. Then he felt a hand on his arm. It was her. Brooke was standing beside him, her veil slightly askew, and her eyes up close had a color he hadn't expected, light brown, almost honey, with a brightness that was half joy and half desperation. You came, she said. I came, he replied. But I need to understand why. She looked around, checked if anyone was nearby. Then she did something Caleb didn't expect. She stepped closer, gently placed her hand on his face, and whispered in his ear. 4 words. 4 words that made the whole world stop. You are my brother. Look, when I got to that part of the story, I paused for a while before continuing. Because there are secrets that stay buried for entire decades, and when they surface like this, without warning, without preparation, at a moment when you least expect it. Caleb couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The glass of juice almost slipped from his hand. Brooke held his arm before he lost his balance. I know it's a lot, she said softly, not taking her eyes off him. But I couldn't tell you before. I needed you to come. I needed to see you up close. You're confusing something, he replied, his voice coming out strange, as if it weren't his. My mother is Miriam. I was raised by her for as long as I can remember. I know who Miriam is, Brooke said. She's your adoptive mother, and she loved you her whole life. I'm not questioning that. But your biological father is in this hall, Caleb. He's here right now. He followed her gaze to the window. The old man with white hair was still there. Caleb felt his legs go heavy. Franklin Sterling was 72 years old, with completely white hair, large hands like someone who worked hard early in life, and a pair of light brown eyes that Caleb recognized with a physical jolt he couldn't explain. They were the same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. The story Brooke told in that corner of the hall came out in pieces, between greetings she had to give, and moments when she lowered her voice even more. Caleb absorbed each word, like someone trying to hold water in their hands. Some things slipped away. Others stayed. 32 years ago, Franklin Sterling was engaged to Victoria, daughter of a traditional family that had as much money as it had demands. Before the wedding, he fell in love with another woman, a teacher named Rebecca from a small town in the Midwest without fortune, without an important name, but with a presence he never truly managed to forget. The affair was brief, but it was enough. When Rebecca became pregnant, Victoria found out. And then the situation turned into that kind of crossroads that has no good way out in any direction. Victoria gave an ultimatum. Either Franklin went through with the marriage and renounced any connection to Rebecca and the child, or she would destroy his reputation and his family's. Franklin was young, he was afraid he was wrong, and he gave in. The adoption was quick, discreet, and painfully well organized. Rebecca left Chicago. The child stayed with a trusted family in another region. And Franklin married Victoria, built an estate, and spent 32 years trying to convince himself that he had done the only thing possible. How did you find all this out? Caleb asked. I found documents in my father's office drawer while I was looking for certificates for the wedding, Brooke replied. A folder that had been there for decades. It had your biological mother's name, the name of the family that adopted you. A photo of when you were 2 years old. Her voice faltered a bit. I couldn't sleep right for 3 weeks, and then I decided to look for you. Does your father know you invited me? Brooke's silence was the most complete answer she could have given. So, he doesn't know I'm here? Not yet. Caleb looked again at the old man by the window. Franklin still wore that distant expression, completely unaware of the conversation happening 30 yards away, and in a corner closer to the center of the hall, a woman with dyed hair and heavy jewelry around her neck watched everything with a fixed smile that seemed painted on her face. Victoria. Caleb understood who she was without needing to ask. Why did you do this? He asked, turning to Brooke. You just got married. Today is your wedding day. Why now? Brooke took a few seconds to answer. When she spoke, her voice was steadier. Because I needed to look at you before I could move on. I needed to know you really existed, that you were okay. My father is getting old, Caleb. He's been carrying this alone for decades, and I don't know how much longer I can keep a secret this big without it consuming me too. It was a lot, too heavy for a single day. Caleb left the corner and went out to the garden. He needed air. He needed a space without people, without music, without all that weight inside one room. He stood among the white flowers in the outer garden, his tie loosened, his eyes fixed on the ground. It wasn't long before he heard footsteps on the grass. When he lifted his head, Franklin was at the garden door. The two of them looked at each other for a time that had no precise measure. A 72-year-old man with the weight of an entire life on his shoulders. A 32-year-old man who thought he had come to a wedding of strangers. "You look like her," Franklin finally said. His voice was hoarse, as if he wasn't used to speaking certain things out loud. "Like Rebecca. In the eyes, especially." "I know I'm adopted," Caleb said. "My mother told me when I was 18, but I never tried to find out more. I thought I didn't need to." "And now?" Caleb took a deep breath. "Now I don't know what I think." Franklin slowly went down the garden steps with the caution of someone whose knees are worn out. He stopped a few feet from Caleb, hands in his pockets, with that posture of someone who doesn't quite know where to put themselves in a moment like this. "I was wrong," he said. "Simple, direct, no embellishment. I was wrong with your mother, wrong with you, wrong with myself. I did it out of cowardice, not out of cruelty, though I know that in the end it makes no difference." "It doesn't," Caleb agreed, and the coldness in his own voice surprised him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness now. I don't have that right. I'm just looking at you, letting this be real. There's a kind of pain that isn't a scream, isn't crying, isn't a fight. It's that quiet pain of someone who goes their whole life without knowing they had a hole somewhere, and only discovers it when someone shines a light in the right direction. Caleb knew that kind of pain. He always thought it was a personal oddity, a way he was, that feeling of being slightly out of place in any environment. He had never been able to name it. Now it had a name, and that didn't make things any easier. Just a few more bucks. Inside, the party went on. The music had shifted to something more upbeat. Someone let out a loud laugh near the windows. "Your daughter got married today," Caleb said. "She loves you. That much is clear." Franklin nodded slowly. "She's the most important thing my life has produced, the only thing I'm truly proud of." "She knows you didn't want this marriage." Franklin looked up. "She told you that." "She didn't have to. You can see it in the way she looks at Grant." The silence that followed was long. Inside, Victoria was greeting guests with that motionless smile of hers. Grant was talking with a group of older men, relaxed, and Brooke, Caleb noticed when he looked through the window, had her back to all of it, eyes fixed on the garden. "Whose idea was her wedding?" Caleb asked, even though he already knew the answer. Franklin didn't reply. He didn't have to. In that moment, one thing became very clear to Caleb. He hadn't come to that party as a guest. He had come as a piece of a puzzle that had been waiting to be fitted for 32 years. And now that he was here, the whole puzzle was visible, all its crooked, ill-fitting parts, and there was no more pretending everything was fine. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. And now, continuing. He went back inside. He looked for Brooke, found her near the cake table, alone for a rare moment, staring at the decorations with an expression that wasn't happiness. "Do you love him?" Caleb asked straight out. Brooke took a moment. "I respect Grant. He's a good man. But it was my mother who chose this marriage. I accepted because it was easier than fighting. And now," she looked at him, and in that look was the same thing she'd seen in her father's eyes outside, someone tired of carrying a weight that shouldn't be theirs alone. "Now I looked at you," she said, "and I saw that my father spent decades doing what was easier, and look what's left." Caleb understood what she was saying without her needing to finish. A decision was being made in that moment. Not about him. He was just a character in a story the others had lived. The decision was about her. What happened next, Caleb never expected to witness. Brooke asked for the microphone. The music stopped. Conversations faded one by one, until the hall fell into a silence that felt suspended. Grant turned his head with a curious smile. Victoria froze, her glass halfway to her mouth. "I want to thank everyone who came here today," Brooke began, her voice calm, in a way Caleb thought was superhuman for the moment. "This is an important day. But not just for the reason you think." Franklin, who had come back from the garden and was standing near the door, went still. "Today, I let something become real that I've known for weeks. And over these months of planning this wedding, I learned that there's a huge difference between doing what's expected and doing what's true." Grant took a step toward her, his expression confused. "I need to be honest with you, Grant, and with everyone here." She took a deep breath. "I respect you very much, but I shouldn't have gotten this far without telling you this before. I'm not ready for this marriage. Not like this. Not out of fear, not out of pressure. Only when it's true." The silence that followed was the kind you feel on your skin. Victoria set her glass down on the table with a sharp clink. Grant stood still for a long moment. Then, to the surprise of practically everyone in the hall, including Brooke, he nodded. Slowly, with something in his eyes that looked more like relief than hurt. "I know," he said, low enough that only she and those closest could hear. "I knew it too. I just didn't know how to start this conversation. I don't know about you, but I didn't see that twist coming. Sometimes the person you think will react the worst is the only one who was waiting for someone to have the courage first." The night didn't end there, of course. There were tough conversations. Victoria tried to control the situation, like she always did, talking loudly about embarrassment and what people would say. But Franklin, for the first time in many years, interrupted her. "Enough, Victoria." 2 words. But those 2 words carried the weight of entire decades. Caleb stayed later than he'd planned. He sat with Brooke at a table in the back, away from the commotion the news had stirred up. They talked for hours, about Rebecca, about Miriam, about the years that passed without them knowing each other. She showed him a photo on her phone that she'd saved, an image of him at 2 years old, taken before the adoption. He stared at that picture for a time he couldn't measure. "My mum tried to tell me something when I called her this week," he said, "before I came here." "Did she know you were going to find out?" "I don't know, but I think she was waiting for me to be ready to hear it." The following week, Caleb went to Chicago, where Miriam lived. She was sitting on the porch, as she usually did on Saturday afternoons, with a glass of tea and that calm look of someone who has lived a lot and learned not to waste the days that remain. Her hair was whiter than he remembered, her eyes not. He sat down beside her, and then Miriam told him everything she knew, without rushing, with that voice he would carry inside him forever. She told him that Rebecca's family had asked to find a loving home. She told him that she and her husband had been trying to have children for years and never managed. She told him that when she first held Caleb in her arms, she knew he was the one, that she had always known. "Are you angry with me?" she asked at the end, her eyes a little wet. Caleb looked at her, at that small woman with white hair who had chosen him when he had no choice at all. "No," he said, "never." She held his hand, and they stayed like that for a while without needing more words. There are things you hear and feel like you know that pain from somewhere. This moment between the two of them was one of those for me. In the months that followed, Caleb and Brooke built a relationship slowly, without rushing, without expectations. There were stumbles, there had to be, with so much lost time and so much left unsaid. There was an awkward dinner with Franklin, where the 3 of them spent more time in silence than in conversation. There was an afternoon when Caleb left early and went home, feeling a void he couldn't name. But there was also a late-night call from Brooke when she needed to talk to someone who understood her in a way no one else could at that moment. And Caleb answered. They spent over an hour on the phone talking about small things, about childhood memories, about grandmother's recipes, like siblings learning to be siblings. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Franklin didn't apologize with words. He apologized with his presence, with calls that were short at first and grew longer, with a visit to Caleb's city on a weekday afternoon, where the two of them had coffee and talked about everyday things, as if they were trying to learn to be normal people for each other, with an afternoon when Franklin showed up with a small box of old photos and set it on the table without saying a word. Photos of a young woman smiling at the camera with light brown eyes that Caleb knew very well. Victoria never approved, but Victoria, as Caleb gradually came to understand, had never approved of anything that escaped her control. And there was something almost comforting in realizing the problem had never been specifically with him. Grant, after all, had kept an honest friendship with Brooke. He himself admitted during a meeting the two had weeks later that the marriage had been more of a family pressure than a choice of his own. The two had gone to the altar carrying the same weight, without ever having the courage to truly talk. That conversation, belated, ended up being the healthiest one they ever had. Miriam met Brooke the following year, on a visit Caleb organized with his heart in his hands, not knowing exactly what to expect. The two women sat at the kitchen table for hours. Caleb heard his mother laugh in a way he hadn't heard in a long time, that frank laugh of someone who is completely at ease. When they went out to the garden after lunch, he saw Miriam hold Brooke's arm with a tenderness that needed no explanation. Later, when Brooke left, Miriam held Caleb's face between her hands, the way she used to when he was a child, and said, "You have a big family, my son. That is a blessing." And Caleb understood that she was right. Not in the way he had always imagined a family should be, organized, without gaps, without stories that are hard to tell, but in the only way real things usually are, imperfect, with visible scars and yet whole. He had arrived at that hall thinking he was a guest. He left knowing he was part of the story. End of story. Tell us what you thought of Caleb's journey and where you're watching from now. Do you think Brooke did the right thing by telling the truth at that moment? I'd love to read your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for your company as always. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories.